Hello, everyone, and welcome to Improving Agile Team Dynamics. Thanks so much for joining me today, and hopefully you had an opportunity to attend some of the other sessions this week. There's a couple more going on this afternoon as well. So my name is Ken Howard. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Improving. I'm here in the Dallas headquarters, and we have offices throughout North America. Also author of a couple books, and here to share some of the wisdom and experience and research behind one of those books, which was Individuals, Interactions, an Agile Guide. So let's move forward and get started. So first I want to start with setting proper expectations here. There's a lot of clickbait out there. The 7 things you must do, the 10 things that will lead to building a successful team. That's not what this session is all about. This dealing with people, individuals, behavior, personalities, and team dynamics is a very complex area. And there is no single simple solution to improving team dynamics. So instead, I want to set your expectations that we're going to cover a lot of areas as seeds for you to start thinking about and considering in your understanding of how to develop your capabilities of improving your relationship with team members, or help you in coaching teams, perhaps if that's your role, or leading teams. So we're going to cover a lot of areas in the next hour or so, and we will leave time at the end for questions. I won't see your questions necessarily as they're popping up here. So go ahead and post them in the chat window, and then we'll address as many as we can with the time remaining at the end of this session. So when we talk about agility, and I really don't want to spend time today going into the Agile Manifesto or the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. They've been around for 2 decades. And as many of you know, if you've experienced these or used these, some of the language is a little tired. It's restricted to the technology space. And for me personally, I've been working with a large energy company for the last few years and applying these values and principles in non-software development, non-technical space. But the values and the principles become our foundation, and then the frameworks give us our practices and and the tools that we need to be able to experience some of the values and principles. But really the most complex part of the whole equation has to do with people. And that's where things can go awry. So I want to give you some areas to consider today in dealing with people, both yourself and how you interact with other people on teams. Looking back at the manifesto, if you look at the very first value statement, which is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, the irony is, if you go out to Amazon and you search for books on agility, you're going to find book after book after book covering processes and tools. And why is that? Well, that's the easy stuff. Those are the steps.
Recording in progress.
Those are the steps that you can follow. The books contain practices that you can use, tools that become really popular during COVID in the past year. But the reality is there's an imbalance because we're seeing more in the processes and tools space and not a lot in the individuals interaction space. Colleague Barry Rogers and I, about a decade ago, were speaking at a conference on the individuals and interaction space, and we were approached by an editor from Addison-Wesley, and that's what led to our book, Individuals and Interactions, an Agile Guide, because he said at all these Agile conferences, most of the talks have to do with processes and tools. And I think that scale has tilted quite a bit in the last several years, but it's an area that requires a lot more attention. Now, when it comes to the individual part, it really does have its perks because think about it. When you're working alone, you have complete autonomy. You get to control the pace of work and the work output. You get to work on conflict-free, nobody to disagree with, and you have this self-satisfaction that you accomplished something on your own. But the reality is, what about capacity? What if you don't have enough capacity within the time frame expected to get the work done? What if you don't possess all the knowledge or skills that you need to do a certain thing or set of things? And what about getting not only complementary ideas, but contradictory ideas. Now, contradictory ideas may be kind of a hassle because they slow you down, but they could lead to a better solution. So many of you may have heard this story before, but back in 1907, a statistician in the UK, his name was Francis Galton, put an ox at the entrance to a county fair and asked people to guess the weight of the ox. He had them write the weight down on the back of the ticket, and he had a prize at the end of the day for the person who came closest to getting the weight of guessing the weight of the ox. Well, there were about 850 guesses the first time he ran the experiment. And when he ran all sorts of statistics on it, he found that the median, the number right in the middle of all 850 guesses, was actually within 2 pounds of the actual weight of the ox. But no single guess was anywhere near the actual weight of the ox. It was something nobody's truly an expert at. So he found this concept, the wisdom of crowds, meant that if you get a critical mass of people together here, ideas, wisdom, brains, background, experience, you'll get net a better result. He actually wrote this up in the esteemed scientific journal Nature and went on to repeat this experiment in many varied ways and found similar results. About 100 years later, an author named James Sawicki wrote a book called The Wisdom of Crowds. Some of you may have heard of that or even read it back in 2005. And when Sawicki was going on his book tours, he'd put a jar of jelly beans at the front of a room and have people guess the number of jelly beans. And his same experience, it was that center point in all the guesses that was closer to the actual number of jelly beans than any individual guests in the room. Back in the 60s, NASA actually used this concept when developing the moon survival exercise to train the lunar astronauts to prepare for the lunar missions. And there's a lot of business exercises as well, desert survival, subarctic survival. They go through the same exercise where group individuals will rank items for their survival from most important to least important, and they'll find that a group ranking always exceeds the rank of any individual within that group. So it's important to get people together and get our minds together when we solve problems, but it takes longer and it can be frustrating. Individual work gets done much more quickly than group work, but group work yields better quality results. So ultimately, teamwork is an ideal that we're seeking. So, story about groups and people and individuals and perceptions. About 100 years ago in the Delhi area of northern India, they were having a problem with cobras. Cobras were overrunning the city, and they had to solve this problem. So at the time, the British government was controlling the area, and they put a committee together. They discussed all sorts of possible solutions to this cobra problem, and ultimately they came up with a solution. And that solution was, let's offer a bounty. If people bring us dead cobras, we will pay them a bounty. So people showed up at the doorstep of the city hall, and they brought bags of cobras, and they were paid. And slowly but surely, the cobra population started to disappear. Now, you would expect logically that this solution and anticipating human behavior led to a logical result. But the reality is, and they call this the law of unintended consequences, the reverse actually happened. When people discovered they could make money bringing cobras in, they started breeding them. And cobra farms started to pop up all over the place. And slowly but surely, not only did the cobra population returned to where it was before the problem was identified, it actually became much far, far worse. So can't always fully and thoroughly, sitting in a conference room, anticipate human behavior. Keys to understanding people then requires a combination of three areas: psychology, which has to do with the study of the mind and behavior. There is social psychology, which has to do with the areas of human interaction, kind of a variation on psychology. And then the third area is sociology, which has to do with the structure and function of societies. Now, if you take these three areas in a business context, they all still exist. And it's really the combination of all three of these that is what we consider organizational behavior. So some key milestones in the areas of organizational behavior. If you go back to the late 1800s to the early 1900s, people are dealt with as parts of the machine. I actually was in a meeting last week where somebody mentioned Taylorism. Taylorism and Frederick Taylor in his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, described people not as emotional beings, but actually as physical, muscular machines capable of carrying a certain amount, being able to twist a knob a certain number of times per hour, treating people basically like they were robots. And this mindset maybe led to a more efficient factory, but it brought on a whole new set of problems. Not long after Taylor, famously Franklin and Lillian Gilbreth developed the concept of time motion studies. They'd go into a factory and they would get their stopwatch out and they would measure things and determine, if we move this machine 6 inches closer to this person and move this person here and this person here, we can increase the throughput of our factory. And when we talk about lean and agility, a lot of times you'll hear the term throughput, and just moving people around and manipulating machines to get better throughput is dealing with people as robots, but it's not dealing with their emotional side. Interestingly, Franklin and Lillian also had 12 kids, and 2 of their kids wrote a book about their experience at home, because Franklin and Lillian now actually brought their mindset into the household and managing a complex household of 12 kids. And the book was called Cheaper by the Dozen, which became a movie, remade with Steve Martin years later, but that had nothing to do with the original idea behind the book. And just to give you an idea about that mindset, Franklin felt that the bathroom was the biggest waste of time in the day because you were sitting there not being productive at all. So he put a foreign language record and record player in the bathroom. So while you're sitting there, you could at least be learning a foreign language. Then when one of his kids got tonsillitis, he went to the doctor and the doctor said, well, you're going to admit him to the hospital. We're going to do the surgery. They're going to recover for a couple of days and then you'll take him home. And Franklin started thinking about this and thought, wow, I'm going to have to repeat this unproductive thing 12 times. So instead, he brought the doctor to the house and lined all 12 kids up, set up an operating room in the dining room and had all 12 tonsils all removed all at once, factory style. So that's the mindset that he took into the workplace. And that was not a sustainable way of motivating people or getting people to enjoy the work that they do. The tipping point happened when Elton Mayo conducted the famous Hawthorne experiment, where he dimmed the lights and he brightened the lights in a workplace. And he found, regardless of whether the light went brighter or dimmer, productivity went up. It had nothing to do with luminosity. It had to do with people being paid attention to. The workers felt when the lights changed that management was watching them, they were paying attention to them, they cared about what they were doing, and their productivity went up. So this spurred a whole new era, which is where we dealt with people as emotional beings. Emotional beings, Kurt Lewin's nature versus nurture. How much of what I do and how much of my behavior is motivated by the way it was intrinsic to the way I am because I was born this way versus things that I learned from my parents, from my family, from the people that I work with, from my friends and neighbors. Abraham Maslow in the 40s with this famous hierarchy of needs. Douglas McGregor, Theory X, Theory Y people. The Theory X manager would say, I need to bark orders, command people to do work to motivate them. The Theory Y manager saying I should embrace people and be kind and courteous to them, and that will get more work output out of them. So these theories, these ideas were really introduced for the first time in the 40s and 50s and beyond, focusing more about thinking about the emotional side of human beings. And then human performance improvement became a big movement toward the end of the 1980s. And then the third era is the current era we're in, which we call the adaptive organization. It all started in the 90s with business process reengineering from Hammer, Fifth Discipline. Peter Senge talks about an airline called the People's Express that became successful because they were low frills, but quality service. People enjoyed traveling on them. But what happened as a consequence, this was another law of unintended consequences, kind of like the Cobra story, is as they became more popular, flights became overbooked and overcrowded, and people started becoming cranky. And then the flight attendants started having to deal with disorderly customers, and they were unhappy. And all of a sudden, people stopped going because it was no longer the pleasant experience that was the original draw. Dealing with change management in organizations is something that became a big component of the last couple of decades as well. So when we talk about teams and what makes a great team, whether it's a work-related team or a fabricated team like some of these that we see here, it's a combination of people, a combination of skills, behaviors, personalities. It's a blend, a diverse group of people that creates our best teams. So Google did a study called Project Aristotle, where they studied 180 teams over a 2-year period, including as many as 37,000 employees. And they tried to distill it down to what are the 5 components that make our highest performing teams. And it was these 5 things here. Team members being dependable, meaning I don't have to remind people to show up to work on time or to work a little bit extra if there's an imminent deadline that's critical. People have structure and clarity. Google calls them objectives and key results, or OKRs, and a lot of other businesses have started adopting that vocabulary. So people understand why they're there and how their success is going to be measured. Having meaning in the work that they do beyond the work output itself. Is there some meaning beyond this? What is the purpose of this product we're building, and how does it affect people, society, and make their lives better? Each individual feeling that what we're doing is making a difference to the business itself. And finally, psychological safety. And psychological safety is essential if we want people to be transparent and for people to trust one another. I need to be trusted by my leaders. I need to trust my leaders so that I can tell them when something not only goes well, but when something goes not so well as well. Did I really say not so well as well? I guess I did. So when it comes to building agile teams, a couple of key elements. First, cross-functional. Cross-functional meaning we have all the skills and capabilities we need on the team to develop increments of our product. T-shaped. T-shaped says that not everybody in the team needs to be an expert at everything. Everybody has their area of specialization. That's the vertical line in the T. And then the horizontal line in the T is, but there are other areas outside of my wheelhouse that I can help out with. And I'm not talking about doing things that are beyond my area of licensed technical capability, but things I can pitch in on. Self-organizing, meaning nobody has to be assigned as a leader. The team knows who can play what role and where, and people will pitch in and help and do the work that needs to be done, where and when it needs to be done. And self-managing. I don't need a manager to drive me every day and tell me what to do and tell me to work harder, work faster. People are motivated themselves to do that. People collaborate. While, as I discussed earlier, you can get more done faster with fewer when you're working alone, we're going to get a better outcome, better results if we collaborate. So knowing that and cultivating that and capitalizing on that, and also being mindful of team size. Now, why 3 on the low end? Because 1 or 2 is not a team, it's a couple, it's a pair. But why go up to 9? What's magical about this? Well, one dimension is what Dan Priestley described in terms of communication channels. If I look at 3 people with 3 lines up to 6 people, we get 15 possible cross lines of communication. You go up to 10 people, you go up to 14 people. Look at all the cross team communication options that I have. This can cause a lot of confusion, a lot of ambiguity, miscommunication, over communication. So this is why we restrict team size to get it to an isolated area for focus. The Tuckman model has been very popular and common. It's been around since the 60s. Teams, when you put a new team together, You put them together, forming, and there's going to be a period of time where they're storming. And what is the storming all about? A lot of it has to do with personality and behavioral differences. And then they'll come to this normalization period until they get high performing. But how do I go from norming to high performing? They must be continuously improving. And this is why things like doing retrospectives as teams are an important part of the process. And you don't just do it for a short period of time, but you're always looking for opportunities to improve to get to that performing level. Now, there have been modifications of the Tuckman model that show an adjourning step after performing. Well, that doesn't make sense. When you have a high-performing team, you want to keep them together. So one of the tenets of agility is try to keep high-performing teams together and have work queued up and ready for them so that they have the next batch of work. So I can keep a team that likes each other, has already been through storming and norming to continue to work together as a team. So building a dream team on the surface might look like, hey, we should just go hire the top talent that's out there. Well, 1992 was a key year for the basketball, for professional basketball, because the Olympics decided for the first time that professional basketball players could participate in the Olympics. So Team USA in 1992 was formed with this group of players, and they just blew the socks off everybody else. The best basketball team ever created with all these high performers. So this model seemed to work and seemed to make sense. But if you fast forward 10 years, in 2002, they did the same thing and it was a total disaster. And what we learned from this is a high-performing team isn't just about having all high-performing A players on the team. They have to be cohesive. They have to be able to operate and collaborate and communicate well as a team and work off of each other. If everybody's an individual superstar, that's not making the team successful. That's only making themselves successful. So there's work beyond just getting individual successful people on the team. So what about understanding people? So how do we understand the differences between people so when we form a team, we can put them together? Because people are complex. So we tend to try to put them in these boxes and we label them. And you've probably been labeled strengths finders, Myers-Briggs, the DISC, the type A, type B personalities, all sorts of labels out there. And I want to give you a caution that labels can be risky, because if we attach a label to somebody, then it could give us a myopic view of who and how they really are. Now, that doesn't make these labels unnecessary or unuseful, but it does give us a caution that we should be alert to not using that as a holistic description of who a person is, but it's a singular dimension of a very complex human being and a starting point for communication about understanding who and how they are. So if we look at people and who and how they are, we have their core needs. I mentioned Maslow earlier. We have their behavioral styles, which Marston developed with the DISC in the 20s. Edward Spranger developed the concept of motivators. The personality, which is a commonly misused term. I'm going to describe what personality is in just a few minutes here. And then you add in the skills and the knowledge, and there's a lot of variations out there, 7.6 billion to be exact, and growing every day. And the key point here is every individual is different and requires different handling and understanding. So that's why these singular labels need to be dealt with and used very carefully. Let's talk about Maslow. So Maslow developed his hierarchy of needs in the 40s, and he started with everybody needs their core basic physiological needs met. We call these our basic needs. Once those needs are met, then we have our needs for safety, meaning I want to be able to go to sleep at night, not be worried about being attacked by an animal. Then once our safety needs are met, then I can fulfill my needs for interacting with other human beings. All individuals, all humans need social interaction as part of their way of cultivating and growing and what they need, both emotionally and physiologically. Once my social needs are met, then my needs for fulfillment, my self-esteem, how I'm perceived by other people, those needs are met. And finally, my learning and growth, self-actualization needs are met. And a lot of people are unaware in recent years, they've actually updated Maslow. Maslow passed away years ago, but Pearson owns Maslow's work, and they've updated to add a new core need below even the basic needs. So let's talk about motivators now. What motivates people? You probably could think about what motivates you, being yelled at, having a whistle blown at you. Do these really work? Daniel Pink wrote a very popular book called Drive, where he talks about motivators, and there were a few surprises in there. And not to diminish or dilute the benefits of Pink's book, it's definitely worth the read. Really boils down to these three things: autonomy, an individual being empowered to be able to do the work they've been asked to do; mastery, being able to focus on developing my skills and capabilities to get better and better and better at what I do; and purpose, the work that I do has some meaning beyond me. And understanding those motivators is far more important and more beneficial than blowing a whistle or cracking a whip. To kind of go a little bit deeper, Edward Spranger talks about motivators in these 6 dimensions here: social, traditional, theoretical, utilitarian, aesthetic, and individualistic. And all of us contain some combination of all 6 of these to varying degrees. There are motivator assessments out there where you can get an idea about what motivates people and whether you're above or below the national mean to see where you are from a normalized standpoint. But if any of you are managers or leaders, it's really important to understand what motivates individuals on your teams so that you can help motivate them aligned with what their individual needs are. Let me describe these 6 things. The first one is theoretical. These are people who are highly motivated by learning and growth. If I have an employee who might be given an assignment to go, let's use software as an example, to go maintain some code that was developed by other developers that they don't even know years ago, versus you get to go learn a new technology, learn a new language, and get to apply that to building this new product. A theoretically motivated person is going to be much more highly motivated with that second project than the first one. A utilitarian or economically motivated person is motivated by money and the things that money brings us. And that doesn't mean all of us are motivated by money. None of us would come to work. Most of us would not come to work if we weren't being compensated for what we're doing. But I'm talking about people who are hugely motivated by economically utilitarian related things. And they smile, they salivate, they get excited about the prospect of making more money. That's a subset of the population. Aesthetically motivated people are motivated by things like getting to work at an office with a cool conference room like this. People who are low on aesthetic, they could work in a blank room with white walls and not even think twice about it. So again, all of us are differently leveled across the scales on all 6 of these. Socially motivated people are motivated by the opportunity to interact with other people. So this has been a tough year for those who are high on social, because most of their interaction has been virtual through online meetings versus having an opportunity to have those water cooler chats and get to see people and have lunch with people face to face. Politically or individualistically motivated people are motivated by the way their power is perceived by others. So somebody who's high on individualistic needs would be very highly motivated by getting a more powerful title. We're going to promote you from manager to director or director to VP. As a matter of fact, there might be a person who's highly motivated individualistically, but low on utilitarian or economic. I could actually give them a new title without a raise and they'd be perfectly satisfied to a degree. And I understand economic has another dimension, which has to do with satisfying my personal needs and the needs of my family. So that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. And there's also traditionally motivated people. These are people who are motivated by predictability, consistency, no surprises. So dealing with the adaptive organization that I talked about earlier becomes more complicated for a traditionally motivated person because there's a lot of change happening at all times. So understanding your motives as well as the motives of others is is very important in understanding people. Now let's talk about personality, because this is an area that often gets abused, confused. We talk about personality and don't really understand what it means. According to the American Psychological Association, it's made up of these 5 dimensions. The first one's called openness, and we all fall somewhere in the range from lower to higher on all of these. Low being uncreative, conventional versus imaginative and creative. Conscientiousness is the second one, from negligent and lazy to conscientious and hardworking. Agreeableness, from suspicious, irritable, critical to trusting, lenient, good-natured. Neuroticism, from calm, even-tempered to worried, temperamental, self-conscious. And finally, extroversion, from quiet, passive to joiner, talkatives, more social. And some of you may have seen my talk in Introverts Agile Survival Guide, which I did quite a number of times, where I focus just on this dimension of the personality, because this is a big problem area in a lot of teams in dealing with the needs of the introverts. But if thinking about introverts who are energized by quiet environments, reading, studying, thinking, creating, smaller group settings, versus extroverts who are motivated by social interactions, conversation, working in larger group settings. Well, when you think about those differences and how they are energized, imagine a team that's predominantly introvert. What are some things to be aware of if you have a predominantly introvert-driven team? Well, watch for under collaboration, for gold plating, for people being very firm about their opinion about things being a certain way for quality and completeness standpoint, and those dogmas get in the way of getting things done. On an extrovert-driven team, watch for over-collaboration, lower productivity because they're spending more time interacting and less time actually doing or producing or finishing. And also watch for introvert flight as well, because if you're dominated by a lot of extroverts, the introverts may feel uncomfortable and may leave to go work at another team or even another company. So ideally, we want a blend of introverts and extroverts on a high-performing team. One tip is to take personality diversity into the team working agreements or team norms, whatever you call them. So in addition to when is our daily meeting, how are we going to deal with this, that, and the other thing, consider some things like quiet hours, a period of time during the day when there will be no meetings and people will be left alone to get their work done. This is particularly important when we go back to the office, when and if that happens. We might even consider having a quiet area, a place where when people are working there, they're to be undisturbed. A technique that's very popular is called the Pomodoro technique, and they have tomato timers that's set for 25 minutes, where you do work for 25 minutes and agree with yourself to focus and not read email, not look at text messages, not to do anything else. But for this to work, the rest of your team has to be on board as well. They have to know when that tomato timer is clicking, I shouldn't disturb that person. But when they hear the ding, then it's okay to collaborate with them or interact with them. So just a few things to consider. There may be many more as well. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the differences between people. And this is an area that Barry Rogers and I researched quite a bit when we wrote the Individuals Interactions book. This guy, William Moulton Marston, in the 1920s, wrote a book called The Emotions of Normal People, where he developed this model that became known as the DISC: dominance, influence, steadiness, compliance. And it's very popular. It was developed around the same time as the Myers-Briggs, which was, now Marston was a psychology professor at Harvard University. Myers-Briggs was actually developed by the daughter of a psychologist. So it had less science behind it, but it still became very popular as well. But that's more of a personality assessment. Marston focused less on personality, which is intrinsic to us, and more on the way people behave, because this is what affects more of us in work, and we can adapt our behavior in the workplace as needed. And I'm going to talk about that a bit. Marston was kind of eclectic as well. He developed the blood pressure cuff and lie detector. And he also became a comic book artist and developed the Wonder Woman comic. You'll notice his tagline was Charles Moulton. He didn't want to use his real professional name because he didn't want the Wonder Woman comic to distract from his expertise as a Harvard professor, which is interesting. But a consequence of becoming successful with Wonder Woman was that he left his work with regard to the disc aside, and it actually didn't get trademarked, copyrighted, and many disc vendors have emerged as a result of that because it's out there essentially in the open domain. And a lot of people have taken the disc classic. Insights is a white label rebrand of it. They don't use the DISC terms, but they use the colors. I know the client I'm currently working with use Insights. So it may take a lot of different forms. I will tell you, since I'm talking about the disc, I'm going to offer you a free disc assessment that will come in the form of a PDF file that you can fill out a worksheet and measure yourself, and also use it with your team members. This is from our book, and we're going to post it along with the slides. After the session, you'll be getting a notification of where you can go find the slides and the PDF for the disc assessment. It will look something like this. And when you fill in all the bubbles and follow the instructions, it will measure where you are in the scale of dominance, influencing, steadiness, and compliance. And all of us have a blend of all four of these behavioral styles, but I'm going to talk about each of them. So when you take the measurement, you can look back at the slides and see these descriptions to see what it says about you. But when I describe these, and you may even draw some conclusions about who you are and how you are, I want you to also think about other people you work with who are different than you. Because that's really the key message I want to leave here. So drivers tend to be direct, decisive. They're good problem solvers. They're good leaders, good risk takers. They're self-starters. They're very accomplishment result oriented. Their strengths, they're bottom line oriented, place a high value on time, very efficient, challenge the status quo. They don't follow rules if rules don't make sense, tend to be more innovative. Areas of improvement for a driver in working in a team setting is they could tend to overstep authority, attempt too much at once, be argumentative, and they don't like routine if routine doesn't make sense to them. In a team dynamic, they make good leaders. They're willing to speak out. They help drive and motivate a team toward getting things done. They're very accomplishment-oriented, meaning they're good problem solvers, even if there's risks to be taken there. And again, very results-oriented, which aligns with what I said before. So they can even function very well, maybe even better when they have a heavy workload. Let's talk about the second one, which is the I, the influencer. Enthusiastic, trusting, optimistic, persuasive. They use their hands a lot when they talk. They're usually pretty entertaining to watch. They shape their environment they like to influence and persuade other people to think or act in a certain way. So their strengths, they're good problem solvers, they're good encouragers, they're usually fun to have on a team, they keep the sense of humor light, they don't like conflict, so they'll negotiate it away and try to create peace so everybody's getting along, and motivators as well. Growth areas, they like to be liked, so they may put popularity over actual results. If they're trying to push the team, while the D might push the team to meet a certain deadline, the I wants everybody to get along and be happy, so they may feel uncomfortable in that setting. If you give an I a 20-page document, they're probably going to jump to the last page to read the summary or the executive summary, but may get lost or bored with all the details. And these are stereotypical. Remember, I talked about myopia earlier, so be careful not to stereotype or brand people, but they do give you an area of understanding to take into consideration along with all the other dimensions of their behavior. They do tend to talk more than they listen. So in a team dynamic, they're good influencers, they're good motivators in the team, they can provide leadership and direction. Any type of communication needs to be done, and I is going to be all over being the communicator. They can be good at persuading, at helping with brainstorming sessions, at facilitating. And again, they don't like conflict, so they also want to be a peacemaker there and calm the storm on a team. The S is a good team player. They're steady, they're predictable. They want the team to get along. They cooperate with others. They get satisfaction by seeing the team succeed, even if it's over and above their own success and satisfaction. That's an S, good team player. Reliable, dependable, loyal, good listener, patient. They want everybody to get along and everybody to be successful. They don't like conflict either, so they'll try to reconcile it to make it go away. Some growth areas for an S. They tend to be more change resistant. They don't like to be criticized, and they have a harder time establishing priorities if it interferes with the overall employment satisfaction of the folks on the team. So in a team dynamic, they're great at relationship building. They're a great team player, and they're also a voice of reason as well. They can look beyond the emotions when there's a debate going on, when some collaboration event is happening, and they'll try to find some mediation, some middle ground there to make the conflict go away. And last and finally is our conscientious, the C. This is our detail person or accurate person. This person develops the highest quality outcomes from a team. They're focused, they're conscientious, focused on quality, focused on accuracy. Strengths, they're the anchor of reality. They will not be satisfied delivering less than complete, thorough, quality outcomes from their work. Conscientious, even-tempered, thorough, and they're good at testing. They're a good critical judge of others' work because they will see any holes in anything that's presented to them. May have more need to work on developing relationships with others. They may take quality and completeness. They may weigh it higher than actually getting along with people. Again, these are stereotypes, so take this all with a grain of salt. If they may have a harder time verbalizing their feelings. So aligning with personality, you'll find more of the C's fall in the introvert category when it comes to a personality, where you'll find that I's and D's tend to be more extroverted for the most part. In a team dynamic, C's are great at organizing, they're great at quality control, anything related to the quality of the work that we're doing. And they want to use diplomacy to make conflict go away, but it's going to be based on facts and data, not just on feelings. So that's where the C differs a bit from the S and the I when it comes to conflict. So for fun, I'm going to show you 4 very short video clips so that you can try to guess whether the dominant behavioral trait is D dominant, I influencing, S steady, or C compliance.
She wore her hair all, blonde, peroxided. She wore lipstick, long nails, short skirts, tight. She was beautiful.
Yes.
And I just thought she was great. And everybody would just say, oh, she's just trash. And I thought, that's what I'm going to be when I grow up.
Yes.
All right, the next one.
I promised you a president who feels your pain and who shares your dreams and who draws his strength and his wisdom from you.
Next one.
The 30,000 a year have cursed you to keep going on this toil as it dangles 30,000 a year.
No. Well, if you actually don't listen to what people are trying to tell you,
but the numbers don't lie.
I don't think you listen. I think you just cut people.
All right, and the last one.
So I'm really pleased to be here today to show you some of the new things we've built into the operating system for new services. And I'm really excited to see so many people here to talk about it, for me to talk to about it today. And one of the things I like about what I do is I get to play with great technology, and I really like that.
Ooh, that one was hard to watch. So felt really bad for that guy. So thinking about DIS and C. So first of all, Mr. Wonderful from the show Shark Tank, definitely high on the D category, dominant. You could see him walking into a room and taking charge. If nobody's running it, he's going to take control. If it's not being run well, he's going to take it over and run it from there. Then you have our influencer, Dolly. You could see her just chatting up at the water cooler, getting the conversation going. Silence probably makes her very uncomfortable, and she'll try to fill it with conversation and interaction and getting other people talking, but she'll probably dominate most of the conversation. Then we had our Microsoft presenter here, who is more the C. You could see him sitting down conscientiously working on writing his code for the operating system and enjoying getting it to the high quality and complete to the nth degree, which leaves us Jimmy Carter, former US president, as an S. And usually when you think about a president, you're going to think about a D or maybe an I or a combination. And a lot of the recent presidents probably fall more in the D or the I category or some combination. But he was definitely a diplomat, and in terms of getting people to get together and operate and get along well together, and that worked well as well. I said that again, well as well. All right, I'll never say that again. A D, an I, and a C all got in an elevator, and the D was getting frustrated because it kept pushing the door close button, but it wouldn't close. It wouldn't close because the I was holding the door open and waving more people in. Come on in, there's plenty of room in here for all of you. Meanwhile, back in the corner, the S was getting uncomfortable because the S was concerned that people's personal space was being invaded and some people were going to feel uncomfortable. And the C was in the other corner in the back of the elevator, not paying attention to anyone other than trying to add up how much everybody weighed to see if they're going to reach their weight limit. So that kind of describes all four types all in a nutshell. So what about homogeneous teams? If you get all D's, all I's, all S's, all C's in a team, it's kind of a recipe for disaster here, because in the all D team, everybody would be barking orders to each other, but might not be getting anything done. If you have an all C team, then we may be getting a lot of work done, but we may be missing all of our deadlines. And if you have all I's, there's a lot of collaboration going on, but less from a productivity standpoint. And if you have no S's, then nobody's working for the betterment of the team operating cohesively. So you really want a blend of all four of those. So that's where the DISC wheel comes in. And when you take your DISC assessment, I'll show you how to plot the bar chart to a spot on the wheel here. And there's various patterns that you'll find across the wheel. And so if I took this fictional team made up of these 6 people and plotted them here, this is a very diverse team. I would like working with this team because we have a blend of all 4 behavioral styles. But if you look at other patterns, the team on the left here, this is the all Shark Tank guy team. Again, as I said earlier, they won't get a lot of things done because they'll be so busy trying to push everybody else or push each other. Here's the all Dolly Parton team in the middle. Here's all Microsoft team on the right. So that's why using the DISC assessment, plotting yourself on the wheel, and then plotting your team members on the wheel to see where you all align, that's really the key to being successful. So again, look for PDF and you'll be able to fill this out on your own. Takes about 30 minutes to complete the assessment. If you've taken DISC before, chances are your natural behavior is similar to what it was when you took it in the past. This is how you see yourself deep down inside. And this usually stays fairly consistent throughout your life. But your adaptive behavior, which it also assesses, shows how you need to behave in your job, in your role. And this can change as you change from one job to another. If you get promoted, you move to another team, you may need to adapt your behavior. So we call this the mask we put on at work. Oh, not that mask, just the mask describing the one we cover up to describe, that describes how we need to be successful at work. So if you look at your natural behavior, and mine is over here, and my adaptive behavior is over here, if you fall in this category, then there's a gap that you have to be considerate of. And if you have a team member who has to make a big shift from their natural behavior to their adaptive behavior when they come to work, then there's going to be an adjustment period. And when they go home at night, they're going to adjust themselves back to their natural behavior. Now, I do a lot of these DISC assessments when I do team dynamics workshops, and I find most of the people that I work with find they're natural and adapted are actually very close to each other. But if you find there's a big gap there, it's just another thing to be aware of and empathetic about with other individuals. So again, we're going to try to post this in the chat window, but there was a problem with Zoom allowing us to put it there. So you'll get an email after the session, probably early next week, with a link and where you can go get this.
I also posted a link to a Google Drive where I just posted the PDF, so you can click on that link and go download it right now if you would like.
Okay. Thanks, Justin. Okay, so Justin posted a link, so you can get the file from the chat session, so you don't have to wait to get it next week. So when you do take this, again, it's free of charge. Feel free to duplicate it, get it out to other people on your team, and I'd like to hear back from you on how it helps. I always like to get feedback. The last area I want to get into here, we have about 10 minutes left here in our session, is the concept of what's many of you, if you've done any type of backlog weighting exercise, or some call it sizing, many of you use the wideband Delphi approach, which is the technical term for planning poker. And what that really means is we all each hold up our forecast of the size of something without seeing everybody else's. We all throw it up all at once. Now, this can have a different outcome based on the dynamics of the team as well. And I want to show you an example. So in this hypothetical example, I'm going to ask a team of individuals to guess the height of Mount Washington in feet, but not to discuss it with each other. Just write down your guess and give it to me. And I assemble all of those guesses, and this is what I come up with. And I'll plot them on a scale, and I will show them to the group, but I won't show them who made which guess. That way there's no biases whatsoever. I look across at Sue and think, oh, she used to live in DC, so she probably knows it. Now I want everybody's guess to be completely isolated and unbiased and impacted by everybody else. So showing the group this, I say, make another guess. And what ordinarily happens with a high-performing team is people will make adjustments. They'll say, oh, well, when I see where everybody else was here, I'm going to change my adjustment here. And then I show them the second plot. And then I have them do a third and final round. And what usually happens with high-performing teams is there'll be some convergence of the estimates in an area which is usually clustered somewhere close to the actual height, which, if you're curious, is 555 feet. Now, the pattern we just saw is called concordance. That's where the team, learning from one another, is willing to make some wiggle room and adjust my opinion, my ideas, based on the wisdom of the rest of the group here. But occasionally, I will work with a team and I will see a discordant pattern happen, where there's a stubbornness, an unwilling to yield my ideas, my thoughts, and this can be problematic. And if I have a team where this pattern exists, you're going to find things like planning poker are not going to be effective because they're going to cause problems, because the team has a bunch of stubborn behaviors at play that need to be dealt with. And there may need to be some type of an intervention with a team like that. So at the risk of further muddying the waters, and I caution you early on, there's not 7 simple steps to improving dynamics. There is this additional concept that's called groupthink. Groupthink is when everybody just conforms to everybody else and we all get along and we just follow one another. But sometimes we need to cause conflict. We need to cause some disagreement. Just conforming to the team might not make sense. It might not be better for the best outcome of the overall results of the team. Watch this video and see what I'm talking about.
We set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there.
And kind of astounding to watch. And if going on in this episode of Brain Games, they actually had a stubborn guy who refused to stand up, but after 3 beeps, he finally gave in and stood up as well. So even the most stubborn person, those were all actors initially. And as this exercise went on, they brought in other non-actor people and they all conformed to her. So interesting dynamic. So that's not what we're going for. We don't have everybody to just conform to everybody else. We want people to have independent thought. So it's creating a balance. The final consideration here I want you to consider is the work of Dr. Will Phelps from Rotterdam School of Management. He called it the bad apple experiment. He put a group of people together in a room and gave them a difficult problem to solve together that required collaboration. But he hired an actor to play the role of a jerk in the room. So the jerk would just act disinterested, complain about how long it was taking, ask how much they were being paid for working in this project. And slowly but surely, other people in the room started to act kind of jerkish as well. It became contagious. He repeated the exercise with a different group, and this time the actor played a slacker. They kind of backed off, put their feet up. They acted disinterested. They were fiddling with their phone, playing games, disengaging. And slowly but surely, other members of the group started to disengage as well. And finally, he repeated the exercise with a different group, and the depressive behavior became contagious as well. So what's the solution to this? If everybody's going to conform to the bad apple, that's not a good thing. Well, the solution is actually, ideally, if you can remove the bad apple from the equation, that's your best solution whatsoever. But if that's not an option and the bad apple is going to be there, the next best solution is somebody in the group, anyone in the group, and it doesn't have to be a designated leader, needs to play the role of standing up and not only speaking over the bad apple, but eliciting contributions from everybody else in the group. That will shrink the power position of the bad apple and bring the group back to the forefront of positive outcomes. So that's my final lesson for you today, is kind of summarize. High-performing teams ought to have a leader that sets clear goals and removes impediments. Should be self-managing and self-organizing. We talked about both of those terms earlier. Everyone on the team has a voice. Conflict is not avoided, it's actually embraced as an opportunity to improve and managed. Diversity of both behavioral styles and personality styles on a team will yield better outcomes. Empathy is an intrinsic practice. If my personality and behavior are different than other people on the team, I ought to be empathetic to, as an extrovert, the introverts on the team and give them their quiet space and their time to think and study. And finally, a high-performing team continuously inspects and adapts team dynamics. So this brings us to the end. Again, I'm Ken Howard. I'm from Improving. Justin, we only have a couple minutes left. Were there any questions that you noticed in the chat window?
One was asking about different tests you could take to figure out what the motivations of people is, but I think you covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I covered the motivators. There is actually a paid assessment for motivators, and if you send me an email, I will send the information about a vendor that I know provides that. We don't do that, but I know a vendor that can provide that. Anything else?
That was the only one that I saw. This presentation, a lot of the presentations from this week will be available on our YouTube channel, everyone. If you want to check that out, I posted a link to it in the chat.
All right. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want a free copy of the DISC assessment, download it from the chat window before the meeting goes away. Thank you very much for participating today. Glad to have you here, and keep improving.